So we have a new Superman movie coming out this week, written and directed by James Gunn. Don't really have a whole lot of time to cover all of the Superman movies that we've gotten in the last 40 plus years. I was planning on doing something like that from January onward to now, but due to life events, including me moving in and certain other things that I don't want to get into right now here, thought we'd just talk about the first Superman by Richard Donner. Obviously it would be fun to cover all of them, but I just don't have time right now. Ideally I was going to try to squeeze this one in along with Man of Steel, but I'm probably going to get to the Man of Steel one after I see James Gunn's Superman. But without further ado, let's talk about the godfather of the comic book film genre. I don't really think I'm going to be able to do this movie justice because there's so many people on this platform that have been able to cover it in far better detail than I ever will. A lot of people to this day consider this their favorite from the genre, and outside of the comic book community, it's considered a classic and a staple in cinema by the general public. And about 8 years ago in 2017, it was put into the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress. I first watched this movie when I was 14 years old, and I've watched it a few times over the years since then, having rewatched the film a few nights ago for the first time in I don't even remember how long it's been. That being said, and we'll cover this as we go on, there are a few things about it that do admittedly kind of bug me, but I'm not going to tell you anything that you don't already know about this movie. This truly is something very special. Since this film came out in 1978, this along with a few other entries like it, Jaws, Rocky, Star Wars, they were all staples in the cinematic landscape at that time. And even now, half a century later, we're still feeling the effects of those releases. Rocky has managed to expand its run into the Creed series. Jaws was the first blockbuster that, along with Star Wars, ushered the age of the average movie fanboy or fangirl. And of course, the Star Wars universe has exploded into a massive franchise to where it is right now. This movie was basically the door opener of the modern comic book genre. So I will agree, a lot of credit is owed to this movie. I would never deny that at all. There really is a sense of charm and heart that this movie brings. Very similar to the first Spider-Man film by Sam Raimi in 2002. Not just with the heart and the inspirational flair that it brings, but it also has that sense of escapism that you want to experience when you go into a movie theater. This came out about a few years after the Vietnam War ended in 1975 or 73, and along with the likes of Star Wars, it provided the American public or the world population that sense of relief and escapism that it desperately needed at that time. And based on various accounts that my parents and other people in their generation have told me about, this film was huge back when it was released. And the tagline that it says here on the poster, "You'll believe a man could fly," audiences definitely believed it back then when they saw how they were able to recreate the flying sequences the way they did. Now, there are some moments where you could tell it's obviously fake when Superman's flying in front of an obvious backdrop with the skyline of Metropolis right behind him, but that stuff is to be expected as time goes on and we evolve with our visual effects stuff in Hollywood. But even then, most of the shots I would say still hold up extremely well in a lot of cases. But not only that, you have a really solid cast of actors in here, along with certain people behind the camera, like Richard Donner, who had a hand in the 1960s show The Fugitive, and directed a few episodes of The Twilight Zone before then. The plot is basically a standard origin story for the character of Superman. We're first introduced to him on the planet Krypton, where his father Jor-El is sentencing these three people who are seen as traitors, I suppose, to the planet Krypton. One of them is General Zod, played by Terrence Stamp, who you might know as Chancellor Valorum from The Phantom Menace. And we don't see these three guys until the sequel, Superman 2, a few years after this. But as part of their punishment, they're sent into the Phantom Zone where they'll remain there for eternity. Guilty. Guilty. Then we see Jor-El warning the Kryptonian government of the inevitable doom that the planet Krypton will experience as the Red Sun comes in to wipe it all out. Of course, they're not willing to listen to reason, so Jor-El and his wife decide to send off their son Kal-El to a safe haven on the planet Earth. The thing to note about this movie as I was rewatching it, the production design of the planet Krypton, while it is pretty dated in certain areas, and you can tell these are miniature sets, and it's very blocky and very obvious that it's not a seamless looking type of environment. You have to give it some leeway there because it is a product of its time, but even for that time period, I would say the design of Krypton is quite impressive. Similar, I guess, to Man of Steel, when we see an extended look at the planet Krypton, everything feels very weird and alien-like. Obviously, these are not human beings necessarily, but there is something that's enticing about the planet Krypton. I mean, I'm sure there's been some comics for Superman that have explored the life of Krypton before he became Superman. The closest that we've ever seen in the movies is Man of Steel. We'll cover that at a later time. But I do kind of wish that we had some sort of extended sequence where we can actually get a sense of what Kryptonian society was like. Now, only speaking from my experience, I'm not really well versed in the Superman lore, so please don't shoot me or throttle me for not being up to date on the Superman comics. I also picked up on this tone from Jor-El as he's saying goodbye to his son. It's a very ominous vibe while simultaneously heartbreaking. Superman's mother Lara is obviously heartbroken that she has to leave her child behind or send him off to a better place. But she, along with Jor-El, know that it's for his own good since they don't really have much time left. So the planet is destroyed and Kal-El goes off to planet Earth, taking about a 3-year trip across the galaxy, running into Martha and Jonathan Kent, his adoptive parents, as they're driving home. They're obviously wowed by where he came from and his incredibly freakishly awesome strength when he's able to easily lift up that truck so Jonathan Kent can fix that tire of his. And they realize this kid is somebody special. And this is actually a fairly quick to the point type of origin story. It doesn't waste any time focusing on certain areas that we don't really need to be focusing on. There's no giant info dumps to hopefully get the audience to understand what's happening with the characters. You could say that it all kind of speeds through his origin and that maybe we could have had more time with him as a kid, discovering his powers as he grew older. I mean, if anything, that's what we have the Smallville TV show for. Not that I've ever watched that show. I know. Please, don't kill me for that. But I'm probably going to say this quite often. For the time period that this movie came out in, where there were certain restrictions and they didn't really know exactly what they were doing and what kind of territory they were walking into with this is actually a very serious look at a superhero like Superman, but it also knows when to have fun with it. Case in point, when Clark is racing the passenger train trying to catch up with his classmates, with the young Lois Lane in the passenger car noticing him as he's running by. This scene not only reminds me of Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker jumping off the rooftops as he discovers his powers, but it was also given a nod by the recent release of Wicked Part 1. And when Elphaba is singing The Wizard and I, and she makes this big leap in the hayfield, I couldn't help but notice when I watched it a few months back, is that a nod to Superman? And then I looked it up and realized, oh, I knew it. Couldn't resist. Similar to Peter Parker jumping off the rooftops, there are a couple of shots, if you're looking closely, with Clark running next to the train where you can notice the effects are kind of like, what? But even so, like with Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, it's just a huge crowd cheering moment that I can't really help but have a big smile on my face when I watch it. Jeff East plays young Clark Kent, and it's actually Christopher Reeves that overdubs his lines in the final cut. But when he comes back to his house and kind of freaks out his classmates, including Lana, who I guess has a big part in the Smallville TV show and in the Superman lore, gets much needed words of wisdom from his father, Jonathan Kent, or his adoptive father. This is basically the equivalent of Uncle Ben's words of wisdom to Peter Parker: with great power comes great responsibility. Clark is obviously amazed by what he's able to do, but he's not mature enough to understand that he can't exactly use these powers to puff up his own ego. Something that Jonathan Kent tries to convey to him. One thing I do know, son, is that you are here for a reason. You could say it's a little cornball and kind of cheesy, but that plays into the wholesome charm that this movie has. Just like with Cliff Robertson's Uncle Ben in Spider-Man 2002. They instill good values in somebody like Clark Kent so he could carry that on into his adult years when he's Superman and Clark Kent. But then we get a surprisingly heartbreaking moment when Jonathan Kent dies of a heart attack. It's a very simple thing, but it has a huge, profound effect on Clark Kent and his own personal journey. Something that he's not able to stop from happening. He can do all these things, but he's not able to save his father from a health crisis. And I don't really like to compare too much, and we'll talk about this when we get to Man of Steel pretty soon. But I found this death of Jonathan Kent to be a lot more impactful than what they do with him in Man of Steel. Yeah, I said it. Come and get me. But the reason why I think that way is because it speaks to something that's very real and human-like. We all think that we're invincible and that our time is guaranteed, but really it's not. Tomorrow's not a guarantee. Nothing is ever really a given in life. As Riley said to Ellie in The Last of Us, we're all going to the same place. Some of us just get there faster than others. But also, you don't give up on the time that you have. And they established earlier on in the movie that he was having some sort of health concerns as he was looking at his wrist. So I think it was inevitable that he was going to have some sort of heart attack from the rush of being with his son or just having a good time with him. Something very simple, but something that he never could have predicted what would happen until it was too late. I know from personal experience, a good friend of mine passed away unexpectedly a couple of years ago due to an aneurysm that she had. And I can tell you for a fact that it rocked my world really hard, including everybody in her family and all the people that she befriended in her life. So after Clark discovers a Kryptonian crystal in the barn nearby, he decides to go off to the north to figure out what exactly his purpose is. Inevitably, he goes to the North Pole and finds the Fortress of Solitude and sees a hologram of his birth father, Jor-El, who I guess had some sort of pre-recorded stuff to put into the Fortress of Solitude when he crashed. Again, I'm not really sure how this goes, so please don't kill me for not knowing this. But it all feels like a sense of catharsis for us, the audience, and for Clark when he finally starts to discover who he is. And we get a montage of going through all these different areas of the galaxy as he learns all of this knowledge about Krypton, the red sun of Krypton, how the universe works. They sum it up pretty quickly, and I kind of wish that we had at least one image of him getting wowed by all the information that he's learning from Jor-El. For me, it always felt kind of weird that they just went with the images that they did. However, I do love seeing the reveal shot of him from afar, mind you, in the Superman outfit, with the music by John Williams starting to ramp up. even now, after all this time, it still gets me. And of course, I can't pass this up. John Williams, once again, is a master. If there's anybody in Hollywood that has not disappointed me, it's that guy alone. Maybe it's just a coincidence, I don't know, but that opening sequence with the title card and the cast members' names going off into the distance with the main theme from Superman playing, was that a nod to Star Wars? I think I'm gonna vote yes on that one. But then we really get to the section that's the meat of the story, that everybody remembers the movie for, or at least most people do anyway. Where we see adult Clark Kent establishing himself in Metropolis, getting a job at the Daily Planet, trying to befriend his co-workers, but practically everybody just writes him off as just some unassuming bumbling moron who doesn't really know how to carry himself in public. I guess on paper that would sound like a big stretch for an actor to pull off, but Christopher Reeves somehow managed to strike all the right notes, where everybody would look at him and say, yeah, there is no way that guy could be heroic. I mean, obviously, there's been a lot of comments on his glasses and how you can't really see past the glasses and recognize that that guy is Superman. The suspension of disbelief is going to be a thing no matter how good you make the material out to be. I don't really know how they're going to do that in the upcoming Superman a few days from now. And even in Man of Steel, they didn't even try to go in that direction. Lois Lane saw right through his glasses the moment she saw him as Clark Kent. I know, I'm kind of rambling on right now, but they do a similar thing in Captain America the Winter Soldier. When they're in the Apple store, the employee there recognizes that it's Steve Rogers, but he doesn't say his name out loud. I mean, Captain America, I suppose, is the Superman of the Marvel Universe. Shouldn't be a surprise. And he only manages to throw off suspicion even further as he struggles to get through the revolving door and catches that bullet from that mugger in the alleyway. Both of those moments, mind you, were referenced to in the Wonder Woman movie from 2017. I can't really wait any longer, but Christopher Reeve as Superman, Clark Kent, not original coming from me. He really is, I think, the living embodiment of this character. We've seen plenty of actors carry on the mantle in his place in the years since then, but he really manages to strike that right chord as Clark Kent, who's bumbling and unassuming and very mild-mannered, to a very brave and heroic and a slight sense of humor on the Superman side of things. Not only does he look the part, his persona feels exactly like the character in my mind should be. Well, they say the confession's good for the soul. I'd listen to this man. Take him away. I don't want to delve deep into it too much. I've already talked about it last year with the documentary that they released about him, but it really is a tragedy what this guy went through in the years since then when he experienced his paralysis. Makes me wonder, had he been able to survive that heart attack that he had the day that he died, if he was able to walk again, could he have made an appearance in this upcoming Superman as a cameo, kind of like what they did with Stan Lee when he was alive in the various Marvel movies that they made? Maybe in another timeline, in another universe, they were able to accomplish that. I'll ask God when my time comes. But his arrival as Superman when he saves Lois Lane as she falls out of the helicopter from that high-rise, this is obviously an iconic moment from this movie that everybody talks about, and it's very reminiscent to Spider-Man saving MJ at the Oscorp Unity Festival, seeing the people cheer him on as the music is playing in the background. I mean, I would like to call it the sense of romantic escapism that we all want to see when we go to a movie theater or watch a movie that's about a superhero like Superman. This whole sequence, man, is just pure cinema as far as I'm concerned. Anyone who tries to argue otherwise with me, you have failed.
I certainly hope this little incident hasn't put you off flying, miss. Statistically speaking, of course, it's still the safest way to travel.
Yeah, no, sorry. Still don't like to fly. I'd rather take a train. Then as follows, we see him making the rounds throughout Metropolis, stopping bank robbers, stopping a cat burglar, saving Air Force One as it loses its engine from a lightning storm, saving a cat from a tree, all the classic Superman stuff that we want to see. And I have to tell you, even if it's cheesy in certain areas, and I heard some people say that they wanted more scenes like that to make it a truly great Superman movie. I'm not going to name the people who I'm talking about. We'll see what happens with James Gunn's Superman a few days from now, but as of now, I think that this is the best we've got. I'm not saying that you can't feel a certain way about a movie, but if you're really that fussy about it and you're very nitpicky and you want it to feel exactly like it was in the comics, you might want to take a look in the mirror sometime soon. Well, yes, I think they could have delved maybe a little deeper in certain areas, but I can appreciate what this movie's trying to offer with Superman, and I think out of all the characters that are in here, Superman Clark Kent is probably the most well-rounded character in this whole thing. And he's able to win the public over really quickly, and all the news outlets from the Daily Planet, the Daily News are talking about Superman and what his deal might be, and he offers a request to Lois Lane for an interview. And the character Perry White is basically the J. Jonah Jameson of the DC universe, and he's got some really fun moments in here. Hey, what are you still standing here for? You got a job to do. I wasn't gonna say it. Go And then there's the famous "I spent the night with Superman" interview that Lois gives to Superman, where we, along with the city of Metropolis, learn certain details about him that will later come back to bite him. He can see through everything except through lead, and he's here to fight for truth, justice, and the American way. And also, he never lies. He takes her for a flight into the sky above Metropolis, and I'm failing to find the words to describe how this makes me feel, and obviously a lot of other people feel this way too. There's just some sort of movie magic that's lingering throughout this whole sequence. When Lois has this inner monologue of, "Can you read my mind?" Alright, it's a little sappy. Again, it's that romanticism that this movie offers that I can't really help but smile when I watch it. And of course, I'm not the only one to talk about this, but when Clark Kent shows up after Superman takes off, and he takes off his glasses and immediately goes into Superman mode. Such a simple thing, but it's beautiful. And how Christopher Reeves manages to transition from one persona to the other. There are very few actors out there that are able to execute that beat exactly the way he did. Also, it kind of echoes for me in one of the recent Superman trailers as he's being interviewed by Lois.
Superman.
Miss Lane.
And it's an example for me that Christopher Reeves was truly one of a kind. Now, I've talked a lot about the good stuff, but to be fair and reasonable, as far as the rest of the characters, like I said, Clark Kent is probably the most well-rounded. Lois Lane, played by Margot Kidder, the development that's supposed to be there for her, there really isn't any. Margot Kidder plays the part fine. I got nothing against her personally, and we get some snippets of what her life is like outside of work, but all we really know is that she's very determined to get that next salacious, juicy story. And obviously, she's charmed by Superman. I mean, what woman wouldn't be interested in him? I totally understand why she's into him, but I don't really know why Clark Kent is into her. Rewatching this movie, I found very little attempt to build her up as a character, even in the least bit. There's really nothing else beyond her work life. And I wish that we had some small scene, or maybe one scene, where we got to know her a little bit and what drives her to be the person that she is. Now let's talk about Lex Luthor, played by the late Gene Hackman. Gene Hackman is obviously a huge part of why this movie's remembered. He really is hamming it up in all the right ways, and some people might not find him that funny. I think he's a lot of fun and he adds a good amount of humor here, but as far as a portrayal of Lex Luthor, it's not exactly what I consider to be a great one. Again, I'm not familiar with the Superman lore, but to my knowledge, Lex Luthor's supposed to be this cold, calculated businessman who's able to use his resources and all the corruption that he's able to, I guess, wield in certain areas of Metropolis and throughout the country to achieve what he wants. We get some of that here, yes, where he buys a bunch of real estate out in California, and he wants to use nuclear missiles to crash into the San Andreas Fault, collapsing the entire West Coast, so he can own all what's left of California. Costa de Lex. I apologize, I'm getting ahead of myself here. But Lex Luthor does some things that kind of make my jaw drop. When he shoves that cop onto the railroad track and he gets run over by that train. Obviously, they're not going to show what he looked like due to the PG rating of this whole thing. And this is more geared towards kids as well, not just adults. But even for the time period, that was a pretty big shock. And I would say kind of dark. And I have to mention the thing about Metropolis. It's obviously in real life New York City. The East Coast dialects are there from the cops who are pursuing Otis, who's going back to the hideout. That one cop who gets killed is watching Otis sneak away into the hideout, and when he sees him disappear behind that door, so that's it. Reminds me of my relatives and other people I know who are from the 5 boroughs. Lex Luthor, greatest criminal mind of our time. No, N as in Neanderthal, nincompoop, and L as in ladder. I mean, obviously this guy is very smart and knows what he wants to do, but he's surrounded by 2 people who are too stupid to comprehend what's going on, or they just don't really have a strong attachment to his endgame. Otis, played by the late Ned Beatty, is really funny. It's just one of the most lovable sidekicks that you can ever see in a movie like this. And of course, Mr. Smoker, who ends up helping Superman later on when he's struck down by the kryptonite. And I do like that they show that she does have a good side to her when she realizes her mother will be in danger from Lex Luthor's ultimate plan. As for the plot that Lex Luthor wants to accomplish, like I said, he wants to take over the entire West Coast by destroying the San Andreas Fault, collapsing California into the ocean, setting up his own West Coast, owning all the real estate, so having his own empire, so to speak. It's a conflicting opinion for me that I have on Lex Luthor. Gene Hackman's portrayal is really funny, and he has his moments, but this plan of going that far to destroying the whole West Coast by hijacking nuclear codes and sending them in a certain way to get what he wants, this to me is a huge cockamamie plot that I have never really bought for 1 minute. Some people might be okay with it, but for me, this is a huge leap. Yet, never really cared for it. So Superman goes off to stop the nuclear missiles from destroying their target points. He stops one of them, but he's not able to stop the other. He manages to stop the flood, settle the earthquake by restoring the San Andreas Fault, but he's unable to save Lois Lane, who suffocates from falling into a big hole caused by the earthquake in her car. And his reaction feels very real and raw. My thoughts on Lois Lane aside, I actually felt for Superman in that moment. Kind of reminds him, I think, of what he experienced with his father, Jonathan Kent. All the things that he could do, and he still couldn't save him. And now the same thing is happening here with someone that he's interested in. Oh, and I have to mention this. Sorry, but I'm not sorry. There is no way, no chance in hell that you can beat that scream. Never. But then this thing happens where Superman goes in reverse, reversing time, undoing all the damage that was done by Lex Luthor in his missile plan, despite hearing all the warnings in his head from Jor-El that he can't interfere with human history, but is still motivated by Jonathan Kent's words of wisdom and that he still couldn't save him. Well, I think I kind of understand the reason why Superman would do this. Ever since the first time I viewed this, and every time I've watched it since then, I thought, what? That to me is a huge, huge cop-out. Now, I don't know what exactly went into that, if that was Richard Donner's choice. I mean, this might be a pretty bleak idea for a character like Superman, but I think if they kept Lois Lane dead, that would have carried on into the sequel where he had to learn that he's not going to be able to save everybody, but he could still go on as a heroic figure and do the best that he can do. Now, I realize that this is the first big thing in the comic book genre back then, so they probably didn't want to upset people too much, if I'm guessing correctly. I don't hate it, but I don't love it either. It kind of taints it somewhat for me. I'm probably alone in this, I don't know. No, I've actually heard some people say they don't like this ending. It's kind of a toss-up for me, this whole section. But of course, Lex Luthor is turned in by Superman to the authorities, and Superman flies away, and we get that famous image of him looking in the camera and smiling as he flies away. And they use that in every movie he was in up until Superman 4. Richard Donner's Superman, I would say, is a really good time. Even with all the issues that I have with it, there's enough good in there for me to say, alright, yeah, okay, I could get on board with this. It does what a Superman movie should do, addressing his desire to help other people, maintaining a sense of hope and optimism in a world that doesn't really share those views that he has about life. Even if it is a little campy in certain areas, that sense of hope and escapism and romanticism that's on display here, some people might write it off just for that alone. I think this is a breath of fresh air. That along with Sam Raimi's Spider-Man from 2002 and the sequel in 2004. The MCU has been able to do this in its own way, but there's still some sort of sense of seriousness and some hesitation to go a little too far with the campiness. Now, I'm not saying you gotta go the full Batman and Robin route or anything. No, definitely not. But it wouldn't hurt for you to delve into this area a little bit once in a while. And that's a common complaint we hear from some people, but I think more movies in the genre could use some energy like this. Because if it wasn't for this movie, we wouldn't be where we are right now with comic book films. So that's all I have for you on Richard Donner's Superman. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll get my thoughts on Man of Steel at some point in the next couple weeks for you guys after I see James Gunn's Superman. But all I can say is going into this weekend with it coming out, let's hope it's good. Thanks again, guys. Comment below and tell me what your thoughts are on Richard Donner's Superman. Hit the like and subscribe button if you want to see more from me, and I'll see you guys in the next one.